Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Global Reflections program, which aims to learn from the world. And I am honored to host a world-renowned psychiatrist, Professor Rania Awaad'ı. Welcome to Enstitü Sosyal. Assalam.
Walaikum assalam. Wonderful to be here with you and at the Institute.
You're very renowned and very popular, but let me introduce you very briefly, Professor Rania Awaad'ı is also the founder of the Islamic Psychology Lab at Stanford University School of Medicine. With her publications and books, she is one of the leading figures in the field. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank you for your work and contributions to psychiatry discipline. It's a great pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your approach is truly exceptional. You are offering a new proposition within modern psychology, suggesting that we must fundamentally change our way of seeing. As a scholar trained in the classical Islamic sciences, you combine clinical psychiatry with an epistemological framework grounded in Islamic thought. Your aim is not Islamization of psychology, but rather to develop a sound approach by drawing on Islam's conceptual foundations regarding the human being, mental health, and healing, right?
Yes, that would be accurate.
Yeah. Let me start my first question, Rania. I want to start from the middle of the book. When you look at the world, are you afraid of the situation of the world's mental health and world situation? How can we cope with the feeling of not being able to do anything for Gaza, for inequality, for uncertainties in the world? I mean, feeling of inadequacy.
Yes, that's very true. Bismillah. Happy to, start this discussion with you here. And yes, I agree that there is a definite feeling of inadequacy, regardless of what it is we're attempting to do. However, I think it's important to remember that every person's contribution is a contribution nonetheless. And it's important that with each drop of the bucket, we fill this bucket, inshallah. So each person must find their way of contributing, as simple as prayer, dua, and as more intensive as actually going on the ground and attempting to assist, and everything in between. So this is very important to remind ourselves.
So my second question is, how does modern psychology see the human being, and how is that different from the Islamic view? What basic assumptions shape the way they look at people?
Yes, I'm happy to discuss this as well. I do have a few slides related to this. Would you like me to share the screen? Would that be useful in answering this question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me do that really quickly here. I think that could be of use to everyone listening. Yes, this discussion is really about kind of a rethinking of how it is that we understand modern psychology today, particularly those in the room who might be with us who are practitioners. But let's take a look at what this means when you use the term Islamic psychology. How do you define this, and how do you understand it to be different than what modern Western psychology might be? So here's my definition for you. This is the kind of classical textbook definition of psychology. If you look at it, it's actually quite interesting. When you break down the original root of the word psychology, which comes from the Greek origins, psyche means breath, spirit, or soul. Logia is the study of. So in its original conceptualization, psychology was in fact meant to study the soul, the breath within us, the spirit within us. And over time, though, unfortunately, this changes. Let me give an example. If I were to explain to you the Arabic equivalent of this word, because there isn't a direct translation of psychology into Arabic. However, the Arabic equivalent is ilmun nafs, or the study of the soul. So you see that there's actually, in the original conceptualization of psychology, they were both attempting to study the same thing. But modern psychology then shifts. It shifts away from philosophizing around the soul. It becomes quite secular and strictly empirical and rational in its approach, meaning we need to, modern science today would say you must be able to reproduce scientifically anything. And if one person does this, they must be able to reproduce this throughout all the different labs and all the different places. Rational meaning that it's logical deduction. And that connection allows for you to have a mind and body connection. But the thing is that you can't do in modern psychology is study the soul, because the soul is this ephemeral entity that you can't put under a microscope. You can't see under an MRI machine. You can't test and reproduce in the lab. In the Islamic perspective, and let me give you a comparison here. In the Islamic perspective, we take everything we just mentioned already, the rational, the empirical, but we also take from the Quran and from the Sunnah. And the Quran speaks about the soul. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about the soul, he says, and we have given mankind only a little bit of information on the soul, meaning that this is not going to be something modern science can harness and reproduce. Only Allah is the one who gives the soul. So already right here, right at this point, you see the intersection where there is agreement and disagreement with modern psychology. And it comes down to the soul level, the metaphysical aspect of the human being that is often missed in modern psychology. And when you do like a side-by-side comparison, you see here that one of the main things we talk about in modern psychology is that it's the loss of the soul. It's a field that has become soulless, if you will. And I think that's, one of the biggest foundational explanations of the difference between modern Western psychology and Islamic psychology.
And thank you for this, comparison, because it's a very important, conception for us. And the modern psychology have some troubles to explain the situation of people nowadays. And we really wish to need some kind of refresh, perspective, some authentic perspective. It takes, soul as a granted.
Yeah.
So, as you said, modern psychology often overlooks the idea of the soul, since you see the soul as an important part of being human. How does that change the way you approach clinical practice?
Yeah, let me explain a little bit more on a practical or clinical perspective. I'm going to explain to you the model that we use, especially when we start looking at this clinically, because so far we are talking theory. So let's go to the works of Imam al-Ghazali, who did a really wonderful explanation, summary. Many, many scholars contributed, not just Imam al-Ghazali, but he's definitely one of the very main people that have worked on what we call the four-part understanding of the human psyche. And this then will translate clinically. So let me explain what I mean. And I'll show a diagram here in just a moment. But let's look at these four terms, because Imam al-Ghazali splits the human psyche and centers it in the qalb, the heart. And here he means not the heart that's beating in your chest, but the metaphysical heart, the center of all things. Connected to this is the ruh, the soul or the spirit. Connected to that is the nafs, the self, or sometimes in psychology we call this behavioral inclinations. And connected to that is the aql, the intellect or cognition. These different domains is how Islamically some of the scholars understood this. So let me explain the model. This model, my colleagues and I had been working on this. We wrote about this in our traditionally Islamically integrated psychotherapy text, the TIP model, otherwise known. And it's a model of psychotherapy that clinically takes into account all these different aspects that I just mentioned. Some models include also ihsas, emotions, but you could see that the qalb, the heart, the metaphysical heart, is right at the center, the core. And you see lots of bidirectional arrows going back and forth, meaning there's a connection between the heart and the behavior, between that and the cognition, and even between the two of them externally out here. You see that these connections all the way through is different than the way modern Western psychology conceptualizes the human being, where so much of the effort is really focused on cognition, aql, and focused on behavior. So even today, the most popular form of therapy, if you will, is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapies, really focused mostly in this direction right here. But what about the other aspects? Even if they bring in emotions and ihsas, which you do see in modern psychology clinical work today, but again, largely missing is this big section here, really understanding the ruh, the spirit, the soul, and its connection to the heart. So there's a whole chunk, if you will, of the model completely missing in everything that we are studying in kind of a modern Western psychological perspective. And this is why we felt so important, that we felt it was so important to really center things back to the heart, the spiritual heart, the metaphysical heart, meaning not just in, for example, when you open up the DSM, from which we diagnose from psychiatric and psychological conditions, you find certain conditions there, but not everything. For example, you'll find personality disorders, and we understand that there must be a treatment for them. But you don't find, for example, the diseases of the heart or the illnesses of the heart. So you're not going to find in your DSM discussions on arrogance, greed, vanity, right? Love of leadership, all these, diseases of the heart as described by Imam al-Ghazali and their treatments, right? These are not found in modern psychology, but I think you and I can agree if somebody is greedy, we must work on this, right? In therapy, in counseling, in working through this. But you're not going to get that going to a psychologist or therapist who's trained only in the Western psychological space. Do you see what I mean?
Professor Rania, I'm very curious about the concept of temperament. What do you think about it? Mizaj.
Yes, the temperaments, yes.
Yeah.
I think they're very important. That we understand that God created human beings and gave them a certain temperament, a certain nature, and then the environment, family, environment, social aspects gives them nurture. The nature and nurture aspect of the human being is very important. At the essence of all humans is how God created them, meaning their original temperaments. And just because you were created with a certain type of temperament, let's say a choleric temperament, right, doesn't mean that you have to treat the whole world and everyone in it in this way. You're able to refine the temperaments through the nurture aspect of it, right? Which is an important discussion here.
Yeah. In what specific ways does the Maristan tradition differ from today's psychological counseling centers, and what gap does it fill?
Yes, very good. I do actually have a couple of slides on this as well, if you would like to continue with them, because I think that approach is definitely an approach that's not often spoken about. I'm very passionate about this. Those who know me know that I'm very passionate about this model. Let me explain a little bit about what is this Maristan. In Turkey, you refer to this as the Darul Shifa. Yeah. And most places who are non-Arabic speaking, they use the Arabic terminology, funny enough. They use the Arabic of Darul Shifa, which means the center or abode of healing. So in English, we might very simply just call it healing centers. And in Farsi, in Persian, the word that they use is bimaristan. And bimar is the person who's ill. Stan is like the location. So where an ill person goes for help. And the English term, the Latinized word of bimaristan, this word here, is they drop the first couple letters and they call it Maristan. And so what are these Maristans? They are the healing centers, or if you will, the hospitals of the Muslim world. And in the hospitals of the Muslim world, and this is what our newest book that we just published this summer shows, is that they are the first hospitals in human history that bring psychiatric care. They're not the first hospitals. Other civilizations have had hospitals before the Muslims, of course, but they are the first time we see the bringing in of mental health psychiatric care into the hospital system, into the healing center system. And the reason that's very important is because many civilizations before the Muslims, when they saw somebody with a mental health condition, they understood it as something supernatural. This is something spiritual. This is something maybe an extra natural possession, like a jinn possession of some sort, or some other form of explanation that was not medical. But when the Muslims came along, all their scholars, all the many scholars who contributed to ilm al-nafs, the field of Islamic psychology we say today, came at it from a medical understanding, a theological understanding, a philosophical understanding, and they understood the human psyche as the model I just explained to you before. And this model that let them understand there is, in fact, a biological, physical aspect to mental health, not just supernatural. And their understanding allowed them then to bring this into the Madistan, into their hospitals. So the treatment was, yes, it had a spiritual component, but it also had a medical component, meaning they gave medications, like by mouth, actual medications, pharmacological aspects, and they developed therapies. The therapies are very interesting, in which they then understood that you have to, all the diagram I showed before, all aspects of it have to be addressed. So cognitively, we do rational-based therapies. Emotionally, we're going to have certain levels of, therapies that we do for this. Spiritually, we're going to have the discussion of the soul and the spiritual aspect of the people who are close to Allah and religious spiritual healing. And physically, you have to also have the medications. They understood all of this, and they did not discriminate psychiatric care from other physical health conditions. All of them were treated together in the Madistan.
Yeah. By the way, Professor, one of the Maristan was located in my hometown, Kayseri, in the middle of Turkey. Yeah, I really wish to bring you there.
I've been there. We read
Really?
about
Oh,
it.
mashallah. Maybe next time we can go again
I would
together.
love to. I would love to. Yes.
Did you visit the Maristan in Kayseri?
I did.
Really? Mashallah. Mashallah.
We had a wonderful trip. My co-author and I, Marwa, as we were writing this book, it took us about 3 years or so to do the research. And in 2023, she drove. We drove from one end of Turkey all the way across to the other end of the country, and we stopped at all the different Madistans that are still standing.
Mashallah.
Yes.
But next time, please promise me I will bring you there.
Inshallah, inshallah.
Another issue, the modern psychology really values the therapist staying neutral. How does that idea fit into the Islamic psychology perspective? Is it possible for a person to reach Kamal with the help of a neutral approach perspective?
Yes, this is a common statement, a theory really, that they say in the field of psychology, that the therapist should be a, quote, blank slate. And that way they're able to, with neutrality, deal with the patient in front of them, the person they're working with. I and many people have contested the idea of a blank slate, in that all human beings are not blank slates. The way you look, who you are, I'll give myself as an example. I wear hijab, right? There are certain things that are very clear about a person in front of you, that is not a blank slate. And so we are humans with ourselves, have our own, color and character that comes through in the healing process. And many parts of even modern psychology talk about this, the concept of the transference and the countertransference, meaning what you feel about the patient in front of you and what they feel about you, right? The concept of the blank slate is really largely debunked, as in to say it's not considered to be valid in this moment anymore. And so, yes, you remain neutral in the sense that you don't take sides if a person is kind of going through a particular issue and you're helping them counsel through it. However, you being blank is not possible, as in to say there will be questions and things that come up that the patient is asking or wondering, or even how you explain things become clear, that maybe you lean more spiritually, or you are somebody who leans more secular. This comes through in the sessions.
By the way, my last question after my questions, I will give the floor to our audience, by the way. My another question, psychology discipline has a huge impact on education systems.
Yes.
Psychology disciplines, perspective on human beings affect the, approach and contents of education systems. So, how do you see the current situation in our education, models and education systems?
Yes, you're right. Psychology does, in fact, have a major contribution to everything. I would say not just education, it also contributes even to, how media and how things are portrayed, perception and influence. All of these things are governed by psychology, actually. And people who do very well in figuring out how to spin a story politically or how to present something in the media have done major studies of psychology to figure out how does the mind understand and how can you change and influence. And same with education system, depending on how it is that we teach in our educational systems. I'll give one example. In science class, you and I may all remember when we were studying our science curriculum that they talked about evolution. Well, in this concept, are they talking about it as a fact, a scientific fact that this happened for sure? Or is it spoken about as it should be, as the book should say, the theory of evolution, meaning this is it's not truth with a capital T, it's a theory amongst theories that are there. But in the science class, depending on how it's taught and who is teaching, it could be taught as fact, or it could be taught a little more gray as this is a theory that's being discussed. And that has a lot to do with how the curriculum is written, who it's written for, and who it's written by, right? And this has a major fact in, contribution from that psychological perspective, again, of influence and perception.
In that sense, how do you evaluate the concept of intelligence, IQ tests, and so on? It's crazy. It's kind of, craziness. Many parents, many educators, are looking for IQ tests, and many, students give IQ tests to enter some schools. And how do you take this, the concept of intelligence? Because we are asking this question to neurologists. They said, we have no idea about intelligence in terms of neurology. So in terms of psychiatry and psychology, how can you take the concept of intelligence and IQ?
Yes. This is again what I mean. There are some aspects that may have some level of truth, as in to say, if a number of people, enough of a cohort or group of people have taken the same test over and over with the same questions over and over, there is some level of reproducibility to say, these are the things that we understand that in this society, in this environment, given these circumstances, this group of people, here's how you can tell who maybe has more of the, let's call it potential to understand content or to be able to create and innovate and go forward. However, as you and I know, there are so many aspects where this does not apply. Here in the United States, it's different than Turkey, but I'll use the example here in the United States. One of the biggest debates are these tests that you're talking about and the things like standardized examinations. Well, if you have somebody who comes from an underprivileged background without a good educational support and system, and they also have dealt with poverty and other forms of marginalization or impoverishment, when you come to give them the same standardized test as someone who came from a place of security, wealth, a good educational background, safety, they're not going to perform the same on this test. Yet that standardized test is the decision maker for which college they go to, which school they go to, what job eventually they may be applicable for. And yet we know that there is a major bias in who writes the test and how the test is written, and then who takes it.
Exactly. By the way, in Enstitü Sosyal, we are working very hard on decolonization issues in
Mhm.
terms of social sciences and humanities. And when I read your books and articles, I said, Professor Rania is trying to decolonize the psychology and psychiatry discipline. Is it right?
Yes, yes, this is one of our main goals. Yes, of course.
You know, since the field itself was shaped mostly by Western ideas about human nature, would you say what you are doing in a form of decolonization?
It's definitely a form of decolonization. Yes, yes. And we're not the first people. Honestly, I always say our mentors are people whom we stand on their shoulders to do this work. I want to share with you. I guess I have some slides I can share on some of the main figures because yes, it's true. The field of psychology today was shaped by modern Western psychologists, mostly European psychologists. However, and now I would say even more American or other forms of Western psychologists, but historically this was not the case. It's just how much do we have access to our own tradition and do we have access to our own scholars? And some of you know that I had done a good bit of work with Abu Zayd al-Balkhi in the 9th century and some of his writings, 9th century, imagine 9th century, not 19th century. There's a millennium difference here, 1,000-year difference. And yet that far back, not only is he able to diagnose and categorize mental health conditions correctly, but he also very much understands that connection between the mind, body, and the soul. And the reason I say that is, again, like we said at the beginning, you don't have that in modern psychology with modern psychologists, but that doesn't mean that didn't exist in Islamic psychology historically. And I really believe you have to know where you came from to know where you're going forward. And if you just allow that colonial takeover that happened in so many of our countries and lands, not just physical takeover, but I would say also a mental takeover, as in our minds are still colonized, even if our lands are not at this moment. And we continue to believe that West is best, that they have everything best there. But in reality, if you peel back and you really look at our own tradition, you find that amazing advancements that even till today, they haven't come to these exact advancements. And I think that's a very important thing that so many people are not doing. I'm not here to romanticize the past and say, oh, wow, look at the Muslims and what they had. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in knowing the tradition so that you can go forward before that delineating line of colonization came in and disrupted it. What did it look like? What was it before? And what trajectory were they on had colonization not happened? You see what I mean?
And my very final questions. What do you think about the, artificial intelligence impact on human psychology? Because people are losing their, perception of reality. What should we do, Professor Rania?
Yeah, this is a whole new field to really look at, particularly from a psychological perspective. And we have felt this ourselves. This is why my lab this year, at Stanford University, the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab, we added two new lines of research this year. One of them is actually AI, artificial intelligence.
Really?
Yes. And the reason we did this is because we had already been working in this space to some extent. But we formalized the line of research because we felt that there needs to actually be very formal studies and work on this topic because this is just the wave of the future. This is where everything is going. And if you don't get ahead of it, it's going to run you over. And yes, I think the virtual bubble and the virtual reality of people who unfortunately are more susceptible here, I'm thinking youth in particular, we have already heard terrible things that have happened. And not everything is terrible. Some things are really great in terms of what AI can actually do for us. But there are some aspects in which you go into the space of a lack of reality, right? You are in a space that is so artificial that you start to believe that that is your reality instead. And isolation, which then leads to a certain level of loneliness, certain level of depression, a certain level of anxiety and a certain level of not wanting to live in the real world that then has caused people to, even to the level of suicide. I mean, these are things that we are seeing case by case coming out, and it's really very worrying, actually.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for your contributions. You refresh our mind and you refresh our mindset. And I hope to see you in Istanbul, in Turkey again.
Inshallah, inshallah. Until then, please take care, everybody. And hope to see you safe and sound soon, inshallah. Thank you again.
Thank you. Salam.
Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.